Imagine this. It is 6:30 on a Tuesday evening. You have just walked through the front door after a grueling day at work, and you are desperately trying to help your teenager navigate a complex college application. Suddenly, your phone lights up. It is an urgent message from your elderly mother's doctor regarding a missed medication, followed immediately by a text from your sibling asking if you have figured out the weekend care schedule yet. In a fraction of a second, your chest tightens, your breathing turns shallow, and you feel an overwhelming, suffocating wave of exhaustion. You are standing right in the middle of your living room, yet you feel completely trapped. Have you ever wondered why doing the right thing for the people you love the most feels like it is quietly destroying you from the inside out? It turns out you are not failing at life, and you are certainly not alone. You are caught in a demographic phenomenon that social scientists and psychologists call the sandwich generation. Coined back in 1981 by social worker Dorothy Miller, this term describes the millions of adults, typically in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, who are, quite literally, sandwiched between the relentless demands of raising their own dependent children and caring for their aging parents. But here is the kicker. The world has changed drastically since 1981. Driven by skyrocketing life expectancies, delayed childbearing, and economic turbulence, what used to be a short, transitional phase of life has morphed into a decades-long marathon. Let's look at the data. Recent studies reveal that a staggering 72% of dual caregivers report significant depressive symptoms, and 83% suffer from chronic anxiety. So why are we crashing so hard? Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the hidden psychological architecture of this dual caregiving trap. I am going to show you exactly why your brain feels so overwhelmed, and more importantly, how to structurally rewire your approach so you can survive this season of life without losing yourself in the process. The first thing we need to decode is the profound psychological friction you experience every single day. Most people assume that their exhaustion is simply a time management problem. They think, if I just wake up earlier or download a better calendar app, I can get this all under control. This is where most people get it wrong. Your exhaustion is not a logistical failure. It is a psychological phenomenon known as role strain and role conflict. According to role theory, we all wear different hats in society. But when you are a sandwich caregiver, you are forced to simultaneously enact roles that have entirely contradictory behavioral expectations. As a professional, you are expected to be objective, efficient, and endlessly productive. As a parent, you're expected to be nurturing, patient, and future-focused. And as a caregiver to an aging parent, you are required to be vigilant, authoritative yet deferential, and hyper-focused on decline. Switching between these conflicting identities multiple times a day requires a massive amount of cognitive energy. When the demands of one role make it physically or emotionally impossible to fulfill another, you experience what researchers call strain-based conflict. Let's look at a real-world case study. Consider Diana, an ambitious professional who was forced to spend $10,000 a month on memory care for her mother, who suffered from dementia. In order to manage the overwhelming logistical and financial demands of her mother's care, while still trying to be present for her own children, Diana had to completely abandon a startup company she had poured her heart into building. This is a classic, devastating example of role conflict. The psychological weight does not just come from the tasks themselves. It comes from the constant, agonizing trade-offs. You are forced to choose between your child's soccer game and your parent's cardiology appointment. You are choosing between funding your child's education or paying for your parents' home health aid. It is a relentless cycle of impossible choices. You are not a bad parent, a bad child, or a bad employee. You are a single human being trying to survive a structural flaw in modern society. This brings us to a darker, more invisible layer of the sandwich generation experience: the financial and physical hemorrhage of your personal resources. Psychologists explain this through the conservation of resources theory, which posits that human beings experience intense stress whenever their core resources, time, energy, and money, are threatened or depleted without being replenished. And make no mistake, dual caregiving is a massive resource drain. The data shows that the average sandwich generation caregiver spends approximately 1,350 hours and roughly $10,000 out of pocket every single year on caregiving duties. But the indirect costs are even more severe, particularly for women, who still shoulder the vast majority of high-intensity caregiving. Because of the constant interruptions to their careers, women in this demographic face an estimated lifetime income loss of nearly $300,000 in wages, pension benefits, and Social Security. But beyond the money, there is the devastating loss of time, leading to a psychological state known as the compression of leisure. You might feel guilty whenever you take 10 minutes to just sit in your car in silence, believing that self-care is a selfish luxury you can no longer afford. But research proves that satisfaction with the time and quality of your leisure is one of the strongest predictors of reducing perceived stress and improving general health. When your leisure time is entirely compressed or eliminated by caregiving, your brain loses its ability to regulate cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone. This leads to decision fatigue, brain fog, and a bone-deep tiredness that a good night's sleep simply cannot fix. In one fascinating study, a dual caregiving mother described her reality of living in a cramped, multi-generational household with zero privacy. Her only coping mechanism? She would intentionally wear a mask and stand alone at a bus stop just to cry in secret before going back inside. This was her desperate attempt at an emotional outlet to regulate her nervous system. Your mind and body require absolute downtime to function. Leisure is not a reward for finishing your to-do list. It is the fundamental psychological maintenance required to keep the caregiving machine running. Now, let us address the heavy, emotional ghost in the room. Why does interacting with your declining parents feel so uniquely destabilizing, even when you are doing everything right? It turns out you are grappling with two massive psychological heavyweights: role reversal trauma and anticipatory grief. For your entire life, your parents were your ultimate authority figures, your protectors, the people who knew the answers. Watching them decline, watching them lose their autonomy, their memory, or their physical strength creates a profound psychological whiplash. You are simultaneously teaching your young child how to tie their shoes while teaching your parent how to use a walker. Coupled with this is anticipatory grief. Unlike acute grief, which happens after a loved one passes away, anticipatory grief is the chronic, prolonged state of mourning someone who is still physically sitting right in front of you. You are grieving the loss of their personality, the loss of the relationship you used to have, and the loss of the future you thought they would enjoy. But because they are still alive, society doesn't give you a culturally acceptable framework to mourn. You are expected to just keep pushing forward, managing medications and coordinating doctors, all while carrying a heavy, unacknowledged sorrow. You are mourning the loss of a parent while trying to be a stable parent yourself. And that invisible emotional labor is exactly why your heart feels so heavy. If you have siblings, you might be wondering right now, Why am I the one carrying all of this weight? Why does it feel like I am drowning in responsibilities while my siblings only show up for the holidays and offer unsolicited advice? To understand this, we have to look at family systems theory. Caregiving responsibilities almost never distribute equally. The assumption is that the burden should be shared based on fairness, but the reality is that the primary caregiver is usually chosen by proximity and deeply ingrained family roles. If you live geographically closest to your aging parents, you become the default coordinator. Furthermore, if you grew up as the responsible one, the peacemaker, or the fixer in your family dynamics, the system will naturally default all the pressure onto you. This creates a massive gap in perception between you and your siblings. Secondary caregivers, those who live far away or only contribute occasionally, often genuinely believe they are doing their fair share because they only see the visible labor, like visiting or paying a specific bill. They do not see the crushing, invisible cognitive load you carry, the mental gymnastics of scheduling, the midnight worries, the constant monitoring of a parent's mood. When this invisible labor goes unacknowledged, it breeds deep, toxic resentment. The lesson here is that you cannot wait for people to magically understand a burden they are not actively carrying. You must hold structured family meetings to explicitly delegate tasks and define boundaries, transferring responsibility rather than absorbing it all in silence. So, how do we actually survive this? The instinct for most high-achieving adults in the sandwich generation is to adopt what researchers call the super sandwich strategy. You try to keep every single plate spinning. You try to be the perfect employee, the perfect parent, and the perfect caregiver, relying solely on your own grit. Let me be incredibly clear. The data shows that the super sandwich strategy leads to the absolute highest rates of burnout, clinical depression, and physical illness. You cannot outwork a structural crisis. To survive, you must master the art of distancing and diversifying responses. This means radically relinquishing control. It means letting a home health aide take over the bathing, even if they don't do it exactly the way you would. It means intentionally enrolling your kids in after-school activities to create physical distance between them and a highly stressed, multi-generational household. You have to drop the toxic perfectionism. Stop trying to be the hero who seamlessly manages everyone's emotional baggage. The pursuit of perfection in dual caregiving is not just impossible, it is a guaranteed fast track to your own psychological collapse. You are currently navigating one of the most intense, demanding phases of the human experience. The exhaustion, the guilt, and the grief you feel are not symptoms of your weakness. They are completely normal, rational responses to an incredibly abnormal amount of pressure. You do not have to be a martyr to be a good child or a good parent. Acknowledge your anticipatory grief, explicitly delegate the invisible labor, and aggressively protect your leisure time as a non-negotiable medical necessity.